This video is going to be somewhat unscripted because I just wanted to get it out before I continue on with my RCIA series and to comment on the state of Catholic prophecies one last time for the next 6 months, especially with everything going on in the Middle East and so on. Further, I was completely put off by many of the things out on YouTube, especially Xavier Aryal's and many of those people who are very insistent that Garabandal is going to come to fruition very soon, when in reality that couldn't seem to be farther from the truth. But the warning and chastisement in miracle likely won't be until at least 2029, as I pointed out in my first video, the macro analysis of Catholic prophecy. I just wanted to point out a few things on Garabandal in the things going on in the world and how they relate to the Catholic set of prophecies. First, I wanted to say that the whole setup of Garabandal is seen in the Bible. That is a warning, a miracle, and a chastisement. In the Bible, the warning, Jesus warns the Sadducees of their malice. Jesus warns the Sadducees of the malice in their wills in chapter 4 of Matthew. Quote, "The Sadducees came and tempting desired that he would show them a sign from heaven. Jesus answered, O ye hypocrites, ye can discern the face of the sky, but you can't discern the signs of the time. A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. There shall be no sign given unto you, but the sign of the prophet Jonas." And then he left them. Here Jesus gives a warning. He says that the generation of his intervention is a wicked generation. He accuses them of spiritual adultery, for they cannot understand the truths conveyed in their own religion about the Messiah. He accuses them of seeking signs, and he tells the Jews that the only sign that they'll be given is the sign of the prophet Jonas, who was swallowed by a whale for 3 days and then spit out. This was a prefigurement of the resurrection. Next, the miracle that would be shown to the Jews. To make it clear what was the miracle in Jesus' day, John says the following: "The Jews said to Jesus, What sign wilt thou show us, seeing that thou doest these things among us? Jesus answered and said unto them, Destroy the temple, and I will raise it up in 3 days again." And later in John, Jesus said unto them, "Peace be unto you, as my Father has sent me, even so I send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said unto them, "Receive ye the Holy Ghost." John continues, "These are written that ye may believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye may have life through his name." Then the chastisement in the Bible. So we saw Jesus' warning to the Sadducees, his allusion towards the miracle, and the effect of that miracle was the Holy Spirit. Now to the chastisement. Finally, God sends the chastisement to Jerusalem in 70 AD in the destruction of the Second Temple. Jesus describes it here. "And as Jesus went out of the temple, one of his disciples said unto him, Master, see what manner of stones and what buildings are here. And Jesus answered, said unto him, Seest thou this great building? There shall not be left one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down." And as he sat up on the Mount of Olives over against the temple, Peter and James and John and Andrew asked him privately, "Tell us, when shall these signs be? And what shall be the sign when all these things shall be fulfilled?" To which Jesus responds, "Truly I say unto you that this generation shall not pass till all these things are done. Then within 40 years the temple is destroyed and over 1 million Jews are killed." Now compare this warning, which was Jesus warning the Jews of their wickedness and their adulterous nature. After that, he tells them about the miracle that will be given to them, which is the resurrection. And he also speaks of the chastisement. And the chastisement was the destruction of the temple, which was done as a consequence of rejecting Jesus, the Christ, and the miracle that he gave to the people. Now in Garabandal, it's also said that there will be a warning, a miracle, and a chastisement. The warning will be an illumination of conscience to warn us of our sin, followed by a miracle, followed by the Great Tribulation. Jesus said to the Jews, "A wicked and adulterous generation seeks a sign." In a similar sense, our generation is wicked. Jesus said the tribulation would come when it would seem like the days of Noah. And the days of Noah were the days of gay marriage, according to the Midrash in the book of Enoch. Jesus said, quote, "In the days of the Son of Man, all will be as it was in the days of Noah. They married and they were given in marriage until the day that Noah went into the ark. And the flood came and destroyed them all. So it was, too, in the days of Lot, when Lot went out of Sodom. And a rain of fire and brimstone came from heaven and destroyed them all. So it will be in the days of the Son of Man." Here we see in the book of Luke, Jesus links the days of Noah with their marrying to the days of Sodom and Gomorrah, which was homosexual acts. To make it more explicit, the ancient Jewish commentary on Genesis, the Midrash, which came about 2 to 5 centuries before Christ, puts words to the oral tradition. Quote, "The generation of the flood was blotted out from the world because they composed nuptial songs between two men. They fully legalized such practices in honor of pedestry and bestiality. The Book of Enoch confirms the same thing from the days of Noah. All the world was reduced to confusion, iniquity, wickedness, and abominable fornication, that is, friend with friend, man with man." Now the wickedness of our generation expands beyond sodomy, which is listed as one of the 4 sins that cries out to heaven for vengeance in the Bible. We also ritualize abortion, the sin of Cain and Abel, oppression of the poor by fraud in our economic system, and so on. Further, we are an adulterous generation, just as the Jews rejected the understanding of the Messiah that was passed on to them by the prophets. So we have quickly shed our Christian roots in favor of materialism, pluralism, New Age, ecumenical belief. Islam in Quebec, weekly mass attendance went from over 90% in the 1950s to below 2%. As just one example. Further, all the major Western governments no longer proclaim the Catholic religion, let alone God's existence at all, nor offer the sacrifice of the Mass as a form of public worship. Further, even during COVID, the Mass was shut down in many places like Canada. And on top of this, we're a generation that seeks a sign, that is, by our materialism. Since we no longer have faith, nor does society writ large adhere to a metaphysical system with the possibility of faith, because a strictly modernist and materialist society requires mechanical, experimentally testable proofs. In this sense, we seek a sign. It wouldn't take much conversation with the atheist to come to the point where he'll say, if only God gave me a clear sign or miracle, then I would believe. So we've become wonder seekers, not believers. Yet Garabandal promises a sign in the sky, which will cause interior illumination of the sins which we commit, making clear to us what it means to be a wicked generation. Next, onto the miracle. Jesus promises only the sign of Jonas, and in the same way, Garabandal promises the miracle in the pines. Speaking about his body, Jesus says, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I'll raise it up." Now, this was the miracle that Jesus promised to show, the raising of his body. The body of Christ is the church, which has been destroyed, and in the miracle of the pines, God will raise up his church, since it will lead to the coming together of all churches under the Roman Catholic faith. Further, Jesus says, "Peace be unto you, as my Father sent me, even so I send you." And when he has said this, he breathed on them and said unto them, "Receive ye the Holy Ghost." John continues, "These are written that ye may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing ye may come to life through his name." The miracle of Garabandal, shall it come to pass, will bring peace unto the world for a short time, and to those that witness it, it will be as if Jesus breathed on them, and the world will receive the Holy Ghost. These things will be done so that we may leave our adulterous ways, and so that the body of Christ may be resuscitated. That is, in his church, the Roman Catholic Church. Sadly, many hearts are hardened and will reject the miracle of Garabandal as a call to conversion. For this reason, the world will be wickedly destroyed, as our guilt is the guilt of Noah's generation, and the rejection of God's final and greatest mercy will be the instrumental cause for bringing forth the chastisement. "Seest thou these great buildings? There shall not be one stone left upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now I want to study Guadalupe in context of what we've just said, because Guadalupe in the Aztec Empire shares an immense amount with our current day, and this can be referred back to the days of Christ. Now, Guadalupe and Garabandal are very closely connected. The Aztec Empire was founded and sustained on human sacrifice. It was then conquered materially by the Spanish, and Our Lady of Guadalupe inspired the most rapid Christianization of a population in history after she met Juan Diego, and various incredible miracles were performed, including the raising of the dead. So what are the similarities between Garabandal and Guadalupe? The primary sin of the Aztecs was human sacrifice. On the consecration of the temple in 1487, roughly 100,000 people were sacrificed over 4 days. Many children were killed, and so on. In the same way, America alone commits over 600,000 abortions a year. And of course, the miracle of Zaytun was fundamentally about abortion. This is double the per capita rate of the Aztec Empire, even in the Aztec Empire's worst year. In the West, we're generally a lot more hard of heart and habituated in sin. We're also adulterous to our religion, whereas with the Aztecs, there was a genuine sense among them that intrinsic within the religion that these sacrifices were necessary. Objectively, their act was still morally wrong. Unlike the Aztecs, our generation has no excuse. All of the knowledge and history about God is available to everyone, and we inherited from the faith of our fathers, the Roman Catholic belief, and at one point a religious society. Out of justice alone, a minimum amount of homage due to the faith of our fathers is required, let alone a living faith, yet instead we've decided to reject all of this and apostatize from Christianity in the West. John says, "If I had not come and spoken unto them, they had not sinned, but now they have no cloak for their sin." Isaiah says, "I have even from the beginning declared it to thee. Before it came to pass, I showed it to thee, lest thou shouldst say, Mine idol has done it, in my graven image, in my molten image. Thou hast heard, see all this, and will not ye declare it? I have shown thee new things from this time, even hidden things, and thou did not know them." The first temple was destroyed for idolatry, abandoning God, and the second temple for rejecting Jesus. Now we've done the same. We've rejected Christ in the Mass and in the Catholic Church. This was a sin that the Aztecs never had the ability to commit, as they were never converted to Christianity. In the West, our evil is worsening as time goes on, and it is compounding on itself, whereas the Aztecs were getting exhausted by their evil, hence neighboring tribes, tired of human sacrifice, stood with the Spanish against the Aztecs. Due to the prophecies of the Aztec religion, the Aztecs themselves believed themselves doomed, hopeless, and on the other hand were excited in our sin and about the great amount of progress we're achieving. Now let's compare some of the events between Garabandal and Guadalupe. When the miracle of Guadalupe happened, a comet blocked out the sun, there was a massive earthquake, and then the miracle of Our Lady of Guadalupe, which resulted in the mass conversion of a genocidal regime. Why was there mercy? They had never heard of Christ, they were demoralized, they were accepting of God in their heart, they were predisposed positively towards God, even the one and eternal God, despite their sacrifices. Because I'm going offhand, I don't remember the exact name, but there was even a sort of font of a monotheistic God within the Aztec system. Let us look then at a timeline of events in the Aztec Empire so that we can compare them elsewhere to our time and to Garabandal. First, it's important to know that the Aztecs were utterly superstitious. Above all, they were superstitious about signs in the sky, to the point where when a comet passed over the heads of one society in the 12th century, they all packed up their city and moved, abandoning the city. The Florentine Codex will display the extent of the superstition. Now, some quick backdrop. On October 12, 1492, Columbus reached the Americas, and on October 13, 1917, the miracle of the sun occurs. Both these events announced a new era. Columbus announced the rise of two new continents, a new age of the church, and hopes for the church. The miracle of the sun in Fatima announced the beginning of the end of times. Mary came cloaked in the sun, which Sister Lucia interpreted as the beginning of chapter 12 through 18 of Revelation. Both these events were the fulfillment of Scripture, as Columbus wrote that he was given an interior infused knowledge that he personally was the one to fulfill Isaiah 60, which reads, "Surely the isles shall wait for me, and the ships of Tarshish first to bring thy sons from far, their silver and their gold with them, unto the name of the Lord thy God, into the Holy One of Israel, because he hath glorified thee." Meanwhile, Fatima fulfilled Revelation 12, which says, "There appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, in the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. In 1517, the church was crushed by the Protestant Reformation, whereas today we've been crushed by the Great Apostasy. Then in the Aztec Empire, there was a warning in 1517 when a comet crossed the sky. For the Aztecs, the comets were seen as a sign of civilizational change. The following was written by a historian of the Aztec Empire. "The fourth wonder before the Spanish arrived was this: comets flashed through the sky in the daytime while the sun was still shining. They raced by 3 times from the west to the east with great haste and violence, shooting off bright coals and sparks of fire, and trailing such long tails that their splendor filled the sky. When these portents were seen by the natives, the people were terrified, wailing and crying. After one native observed the comet, he questioned the sayers of its possible evil portent. When they claimed that they had not seen the comet, he threw them in jail and left them to die of hunger. The king then sent for the ruler of a neighboring tribe, who then told the king that the destruction of the Aztec Empire would come to pass because of the appearance of this comet." Whereas Garabandal says that the warning will be caused by something that starts with A, according to Garabandal, perhaps an asteroid. Both the comet prior to the arrival of the Spanish and the warning caused and will cause dread and despair. Next, onto the natural chastisement. In 1519, the Spanish arrived in America. Over the next 2 years, smallpox killed about 8 million people, taking the empire from 25 to 17 million people, destroying the civilization. Mary Lowley from Garabandal said that the warning will take place when the situation is at its worst. The natural chastisement will be almost through its course. most likely intersecting global revolution in potentially nuclear war. Okay, now let's talk about the miracle of Guadalupe. Just before the miracle of Our Lady of Guadalupe, a comet passed overhead. That's on August 14th, 1531, which was Halley's Comet, which was another sign of civilizational change for the Aztecs. This time, it was for their own benefit, as a new nation was forged under the Catholic faith, bringing mass conversions and millions of Catholics out of a diabolical regime. On December 9th, 1531, Our Lady of Guadalupe appears to Juan Diego. The Aztecs were demoralized, destroyed, their religion was finished, and they were receptive to Catholicism from the start. Once the miracle of Guadalupe occurred, in the resurrection of the dead and the healings associated with it, thousands of people converted immediately, and then within 10 years, 10 million people converted, more than half of the natives. They were receptive to the miracle which God gave them. In the same way, the miracle of Garabandal, if hearts were receptive to it, would bring mass civilizational change. In a certain sense, it will anyways, but not to the degree which will prevent the chastisement. Indeed, many tens of millions will be converted by Garabandal, but it will be an insufficient number because of how deeply sin is habituated in our society. Due to the hardness of hearts, even if a nuclear war comes to pass, we will not change. Just as how the high priest and their confreres knew Jesus was the Messiah, and still they rejected him, so too will we see the hand of God touch earth and will reject him again. In 1531 in Guadalupe, the grace was accepted from Our Lady of Guadalupe that led to conversions, but because we will reject this miracle in our time, a supernatural chastisement will come. Therefore, 500 years after the miracle of Guadalupe, 500 years after the great comet that foretold a civilizational change, in the grace of God, I suggested in my first video that 2031 is a possible date for the comet which Hildegard prophesied, which Akita speaks of as fire in the sky, which John the Evangelist calls wormwood, and countless others mention. This comet will be the refining fire that will revive the world in faith for the period of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart. Guadalupe was an example of God's mercy, whereas Garabandal is an example of God's justice. Now, onto the miracle. In my last video on Catholic prophecy, I said we don't know much about the miracle, but that's according to Garabandal itself. We can make speculations based on the history of miracles and of the Bible. So we'll take a look at Moses' time. Quote, Exodus, And Moses took the tabernacle, pitched it forth without the camp, afar off from the camp, and called it the tabernacle of the congregation. And it came to pass that everyone which sought the Lord went out to the tabernacle of the congregation, which was without the camp. And it came to pass, as Moses entered into the tabernacle, the cloudy pillar descended, and stood at the door of the tabernacle, and the Lord talked with Moses. All the people saw the cloudy pillar stand at the tabernacle of the door, and all the people rose up and worshipped. So in these verses, we see the Holy Shekinah, the Holy Presence, which I talked about in my video on the Old Testament. We also see the Holy Presence in the temple, in the Holy of Holies, and it overcomes Mary, and it also descends on Jesus. Yet this very Holy Presence may have preceded Our Lady of Guadalupe in the Aztecs. I'll quote one of the historians from the time. 10 years before the Spaniards came to the land, the people saw a strange wonder and took it to be an evil sign and portent. This wonder was a great column of flame which burned in the night, shooting out such a brilliance of sparks and flashes that it seemed to rain fire on earth and to blaze like daybreak. It seemed to be fastened against the sky in the shape of a pyramid, its base set against the ground. There it was with a vast width, and its bulk narrowing to a peak that reached up and touched the heavens. It appeared at midnight, and cloud could still be seen at dawn, but in the daytime it quelled by the force of the brilliance of the sun. This portent burned for a year, beginning in the year which the natives called 12 House, that is, 1517. This great marvel caused so much dread and wonder that they spoke about it constantly, trying to imagine what strange novelty this could signify. They begged the seers and magicians to interpret this sign, because no such thing had ever been seen or reported anywhere in the world. Now, onto my quick speculation. I was thinking, after making my first video on Catholic prophecy, if there were to be a chastisement, if the miracle was to be the year 2030, and if the warning was to be the year 2029, which I explained a little bit in the previous video as to why I think that, then perhaps if the chastisement was 500 years after Guadalupe, 2031, which is also my contention in the previous video, then I thought, well, shouldn't we see some sort of trace of an asteroid in the sky? Of course, it could have been an asteroid could be created out of thin air, because God can cause whatever matter he wants to exist as a punishment for mankind. Anyways, I thought I would spend 5 minutes researching the subject just in case, and to my interest, I found out that the largest comet ever observed is actually passing through Earth's solar system in the year 2031. That's the comet Bernadette-Bernstein, which now holds the record for being the comet with the largest nucleus ever seen. I'm not going to spend too much time on it because, as it happens, it's not going to run into Earth. The only way that it could is if something sets it off its current course. I just found it interesting that the largest comet in history is happening to pass by the Earth the same year that we very well could see the chastisement at Garabandal. Thus, the comet won't hit Earth as of right now on its current trajectory, only if things broke off of it or if something happened to it hitting it, or any number of things which could change its direction. One astronomer wrote, "I'm hoping that the orbit of the comet and the planet Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus do not intersect close enough for the gravitational shifting of the comet's orbit, or that any of the preceding of the following chunks that the comet has shed along its orbit, such chunks could easily be given orbital trajectories that would result in Earth impacts, a situation that could be disastrous results for Earth." Another astronomer wrote, "The motion of the comet is determined by the gravity of the Sun principally, but also by the gravity of other planets, and to some extent the propulsion that comes from the gases that get propelled into space as they heat up. The gravitational forces are very well understood, including the effects of other planets. This means we can make quite accurate predictions as to where the comet will be on and on what day. We know it won't be anywhere near Earth. The non-gravitational forces are less predictable, but they are much weaker than the gravity of the Sun. Over a long orbit, they can be significant, but in the relatively short time the comet reaches the inner solar system, they aren't strong enough to make the comet veer off course." So there are two things that could have a significant impact on the trajectory. The first is the impact with something else. The problem with this is that in order to change the velocity by this much through impact, you're probably going to destroy the comet. Anyways, I just thought that was ironic given my first video on Catholic prophecy and how I thought things might shape up, and sure enough I found the biggest comet ever is passing through the year I hypothesized, 2031. Of course, if that comet did hit Earth, it's obviously too big. It would destroy Earth, so it would have to be broken up. Something else curious about Garabandal that I was thinking about is that there is a particular date set for the miracle, which is explicitly known by at least one person, and so in this sense it's not a conditional prophecy. A conditional prophecy is that which is dependent on our prayers beforehand. Like, for example, La Salette suggested that the Great Chastisement would come before the year 2000, and Bruno of Trefontani seemed to think the same thing as well. So did Father Malachi Martin, but those associated with Garabandal knew it would occur later, because the chastisement was to follow the miracle, and the miracle was known by Conchita and also seemingly was known by many other people like Padre Pio, but those associated with Garabandal knew it would occur later because the chastisement was to follow the miracle, and the miracle was known by Conchita, who stated that she would be very old when it happened, but she was in her late 40s or 50s at the turn of the century around the year 2000, which is not very old, but in 2030 she would be 81 years old, which is rather old. Padre Pio and many others seemed to know this and repeated her sentiment in a conference in which he stated that the kids in the 60s would be very old at the time of the miracle. Therefore, because the chastisement has not happened and because the miracle has a set date after 2000 mentioned at La Salette, it seems clear that God made a provision according to his providence for a period of mercy, that is, the years between 2000 and 2030. God respected the prayers of the saints, especially the saints who suffered the most in the consequences of Fatima, World War II, and communism, like Maximilian Kolbe, Padre Pio, and many unnamed persons. Yet Christ's prophecies of the tribulation are not conditional, and therefore the chastisement must come to pass. Hence, Matthew 24 says, "See that you may not be troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet." What conclusions can we draw then? First, that God created two prophecy arcs, a potential one in which the chastisement happened around the year 2000, and then the actual prophecy arc in which from eternity God decided to show us mercy. This allows humanity to make another choice. In this period, over 2 billion souls were created, many who chose God, and the rest have indicted themselves into greater evil, further justifying, even mandating the chastisement. So even when God chastises us, he's showing us his mercy. Okay, now I want to do one update, which will be my last update, until maybe mid to late 2025. Just to add a couple notes, I wanted to start with the most pressing issue, which is the quote from Trey Fontani, which repeated twice in different words: "From the Orient will come a people who are strong and far from God. They will launch a tremendous attack and will shatter the most holy and sacred things as soon as they are given a chance to do so. From the East, a fierce people will come, far from God. They will launch a terrible attack. They will break the most sacred and holy things when the established time is made known to them." Okay, so Iran has a stated goal of destroying Israel by 2027, and every unified Israeli kingdom has fallen within 80 years, which is up in 2028. Trump has also stated that if he's not elected, then Israel will cease to exist within 2 years. Trump also said that the Democratic candidate Harris will totally abandon Israel, which is a quote by him. So the Orient is Iran, the people far from God, that is the Muslims. The fierce people is the Iranians. They will launch a terrible attack. That would be probably nuclear, but potentially just conventional weapons. And they'll break the most sacred and holy things. The most sacred land primarily is Jerusalem. That's where Christ walked. Rome's sacredness is a derivative of Jerusalem's sacredness. As a result, Jerusalem is the more practical way to read that prophecy, although in essence it also applies to Rome because the Muslims will also attack Rome. Now, I wanted to focus on the statement "as soon as they're given a chance to do so." I think that there are two ways that this can be understood. The first way is when Iran gains a nuclear bomb, and the second way is when Kamala Harris is elected. In June of 2024, Defense Minister Lieberman warned that Iran is planning a Holocaust for us within the next 2 years. Lawfare Media has stated Israel's primary goal as of today is to display that it cannot be overwhelmed in battle. Israel's core strategic objective in the upcoming months and years will be to disabuse them of the notion that it can be overwhelmed decisively. Yet Trey Fontani also suggests that there could be Islamic unrest in Rome. In the year 2025, quote, "I found myself with all the sacrament members in St. Peter's praying for our indulgences for the Jubilee. Suddenly we heard a boom, a loud explosion, followed by shouting, 'Death to Christians.'" Of course, the Jubilee year is next year. I was thinking to myself just recently, is it possible that this prophecy could either be untrue, which I doubt because Trey Fontani has been very accurate. Almost all the prophecies have come true. And it was a true revelation. It also seems to be fitting with logic. Theoretically, it could be 2050 or 2075, but it seems far more likely that we're about to see something bad in Rome this year, which would also coincide with the Pope going to Russia. Now, the Orient, the East, in this case, represents Iran. The sacred place is Jerusalem. Okay, so the statement, "as soon as they're given the chance to do so, and when the established time is made known to them," it would seem that they'll be given the chance to do so when they have a nuclear bomb, and it would seem that the established time will be made known to them once Kamala Harris takes office. Frankly, it appears that the DNC, CIA, and DOD, who are the ones that back Kamala Harris, are more interested in prosecuting the war with Russia. It's possible that Harris will win the election, so if I had to guess what the attack looks like, Iran will wait for Kamala Harris to be officially installed in January of 2025 because they know she does not truly care about the Israeli cause. That's Jan 20th, I think. Then they'll wait for the next major Jewish holiday, Passover. What do I think the attack looks like? A possible scenario at the beginning of Passover, April 13th, they open up an attack launching thousands of missiles per day. After 3 days, Israeli defenses are destroyed. Then they launch another volley of missiles, and within those missiles are nuclear bombs, eliminating Israel as a state. Hezbollah would then rush in and secure the territory of Israel. The Temple Mount would be completely destroyed. Then Israel launches a counterattack from their submarines, launching many nukes, destroying every major city in the Middle East. A massive immigration into Europe would occur, and that is how you get the Jubilee year crisis that Trey Fontani talks about in Rome. The Pope would then be forced to flee. Somewhere around or slightly before that time, or slightly after that time, the Pope would make his trip to Russia, and then will come very close to the chastisement of Fatima and Akita. This creates a very elusive question: when will the Pope go to Moscow? It's something I've thought about for a long time. To me, it seems 2025 is the most likely year. If the warning occurs in 2029, as I speculated in my last video, that leaves 25 to 29 for the Pope to go to Moscow. But Trefontani clearly puts chaos in Rome in 2025, the Jubilee year. Therefore, it appears that next year the Pope will go to Moscow, and when he comes back, wars will break out across Europe and chaos will break out in Rome. He will then flee for a couple of years, dying in exile, and then will come the time of scandal and chaos. Marie-Julie Genie says there will be 2 anti-popes installed after the Pope flees. If Francis goes to Moscow and has to flee in 2025, perhaps he remains out of Rome for 2 years until around 2027, where he will die. Then the anti-popes will be in control during the Revolution 28-29, until the Holy Pope comes perhaps in 29 or 30, who will have his land liberated by the monarch, who will be aided by the chastisement in perhaps 2031. It's theoretically possible that it could take all the way up until the year of the warning for the Pope to flee, although I doubt this is very likely at all. It could very well be that we see serious events unfold in this upcoming year. I wanted to speak briefly about civil war. The penultimate point I wanted to make was on global civil wars, as many saints have pointed out that this crisis will feature civil wars in many places, especially France above all, but also in the United Kingdom, perhaps in other places like the United States. But civil unrest globally is a certainty. Dupont described it this way in his book, Catholic Prophecy, regarding geopolitical war, not a two-camp war, but a multi-sided war. This is supported by Garabandal. Regarding strife, not a war only, but a worldwide revolution as well, which is in keeping with Marie-Julie Genie. Regarding the chastisement, not simply a man-made holocaust, which is in keeping with Trefontani, but also a God-sent chastisement, which is Fatima and Akita, accompanied by cosmic disturbances, which is Garabandal. Regarding the timeline of the climaxing period to last about 4 years. I wanted to talk about point 2 here, not war alone, but a worldwide revolution as well. We're seeing today that local governments led by communists and globalists are seeking to repress their citizens. Marie-Julie Genie said that the governments will empty out the prisons of criminals as chaos grows. At the height of the global revolution, there will be no rule of law in city centers whatsoever. We already see the first phases of that in some major cities, and just recently the UK was making plans to empty out their prisons and release their prisoners to make room for those who protested. Over time, we'll see the governments become remarkably hateful and malicious to their own people. They will remove civil rights, invite foreigners in, which is part of the plan to build back better, and then once all the foreigners are allowed in, the communist governments will side with them over their own people, which is the greatest showing of malice imaginable. In fact, the malice will be so inconceivable that it is even possible that in France, in the Civil War, the communists will side with Islam, and they could even side with foreign armies against their own countrymen, who are traditionalists. France will have already sent its army to fight in a foreign land, presumably against Russia. And from there, the communists will side with anyone who prostitutes to their cause. In Canada, with the highest immigration rate in the world, France and the UK with their pro-Islam open borders, and the USA with its open border, it is clear that the government has malice towards their own people. Globalists support the communists because they're seeking profit. This is most clear in America, where most of the job gains since COVID have been to illegal immigrants. Also in America, the government will continue giving hundreds of billions to Ukraine and Israel, while giving those who had their houses destroyed in Maui or North Carolina from natural disasters almost nothing, while America has the greatest number of homeless people in its country's history. In fact, to continually support growing wealth inequality in the West, but especially in America, with its exorbitant privilege, America must destroy the things which made its wealth possible. Post-World War II, America supported global liberalism as a foil to Soviet communism, and the capitalists with the anti-Soviet patriots therefore supported women to enter the labor force, driving down the cost of labor and increasing the number of consumers. However, this vision of the world required women to use contraception and to abort their children, and this posed a problem for the corporate class, which around 2015 ran out of a growing supply of consumers to profit from, fearing the reversal of the relationship between capital and labor, which saw the growth of capital and wealth inequality in comparison to labor. The corporate powers conspired quickly to open the borders, once again sacrificing on the altar of the economy, this time offering up the nation's shared identity and social cohesion. Now there are incorrigible problems that America faces around productivity, because out of control wealth inequality and money printing always leads to lowered productivity. This is a problem because there are enormous unfunded liabilities that America vowed to its own people, and these represent trillions of dollars per year. As a result, rather than reform the system, more sacrifices are needed for the altar dedicated to mammon. Namely, there will need to be financial repression and greater thievery. The people, especially the middle class, will need to be robbed to pay the beast. After that, there will only be a couple more sacrifices required of America, namely war. To protect the crumbling empire, America will engage in wars and already has, since a growing contingent in the world no longer trusts the American dollar, nor what it represents. These wars will eliminate America from the global stage because it is incapable of winning on the ground and sea, and it will lose a nuclear war with Russia. This is because successful wars are prosecuted by men who fight for ideology and not money. In America, due to avarice, soldiers don't even fight for money, and all the profits are owned by the military-industrial complex anyways, and the ideology of America simply is not worth fighting for. America's financial collapse is what is required for the evil empire it possessed to die. Once the dollar collapses, the power and reason to be for the empire will be gone. From there, the repression will continue and grow extremely violent for a short period, but it will be vanquished when the chastisement comes and the centers of power are eliminated by God. Finally, I wanted to fix Taiwan on the timeline. The placement of Taiwan was somewhat of a second thought. It doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of Catholic prophecy, and it was mainly due to one prophecy from Nostradamus, which read something like, "Under the sign of Libra, America shall reign, shall hold power in the sky and on land, shall never perish under Asian forces until 7 pontificates have passed." So firstly, Nostradamus was originally French, and this is a translation, and the translation isn't exact, so I couldn't tell whether it meant 7 pontificates have come into being or have finished, as in would come to pass on the 7th pontificate, which would be Pope Francis, or after he passed. If it is after the 7 pontificates have passed, finally, in finality, and onto the 8th, then it would suggest that if Pope Francis dies, say in 27 or 2028, then we'd expect Taiwan to be invaded, perhaps in 2028, which the Department of Defense states is likely, and frankly, it seems more likely that that China would wait it out and wait until near the end, maybe say 2028 to attack. So then on the first timeline, Taiwan should probably be moved into the future, although frankly it's indeterminate. So I'll just talk about 3 last things quickly. One is the 2 factions within America. There is a faction made up of corporatists and globalists who you could say is represented by George Soros, the CIA, who are fundamentally internationalist. And then there's another faction in America, which is Zionist, and these 2 factions are against each other. The Zionist faction is represented by Trump, and the globalist faction is represented by Kamala Harris. It seems like Kamala Harris will probably win the election because her faction is fundamentally stronger, and for Israel's own good, they should have attached themselves to that faction rather than the prior faction. Yet, for example, George Soros actively funds Palestinian protest groups, and so the globalist faction obviously doesn't like Israel that much because Israel is a nationalist nation. 2 last things. One, Medjugorje. I never included Medjugorje once on my first video on Catholic prophecy. I think it's God's will, it's providence or fate that Medjugorje was never officially ruled as worthy of belief or supernatural, by the Catholic Church. And then finally, on Xavier Aryal's in all these Catholic prophetic channels on YouTube that talk about the warning in Garabandal and who insist that it will be within a year. I tried to debate them once, they said nothing, and they'll be proven wrong, I'm pretty sure, so we'll see.